Greetings. I'm Brother Bryant from the Congregation of Israel, the Biblical School of Global Liberation for all oppressed peoples. I am one of many representatives of the NMP, or commonly called the Nazarene Messianic Party, and I would like to welcome you all this evening to our book reading and dialogue. We've been on a two or 3 week hiatus. The comrades needed some rest, and we wanted to really chew on what was read and what has been dialogued thus far. We completed chapter 1 and chapter 2. And last week, it was unfortunate because we did a clubhouse discussion, and the comrades was together, but we didn't. We all made a mistake, and we didn't record the discussion concerning chapter 1 and chapter 2. So this evening, I'm not going to be so exhausted. So exhaustive. I'm going to be very short and brief, so we can have our guest reader, pick up on chapter 3. But I'm going to do a little recap, somewhat, just real brief, real light, nothing strenuous, and we'll start right off in chapter 3. And tonight is a good night because we don't have to, go through what page do you got and what copy of the book you got, because we're all starting on chapter 3. So if you have your book with you, wherever chapter 3 is, that's where we'll be. So that'll make that things kind of a little smoother as far as, I know different comrades and people in the listening audience have, different editions of the book. So that'll make things pretty easy for this evening. Without further ado, as always, I'll start off with a psalm, and then we'll get right into this recap so we can get the reading started. So tonight, I'll be reading out of the book of Psalms, chapter 82, the King James Version of the Bible. The book of Psalms, chapter 82, KJV Version. And it reads, God standeth in the congregation of the mighty. He judgeth among the gods. How long will ye judge unjustly and accept the persons of the wicked? Selah. Defend the poor and fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and needy. Deliver the poor and needy. Rid them out of the hand of the wicked. They know not, neither will they understand. They walk on in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are out of course. I have said, ye are gods, and all of you are children of the Most High. But ye shall die like men, and fall like one of the princes. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for thou shalt inherit all nations. That was the book of Psalms, chapter 82, out of the King James Version of the Bible. So, again, we're going to get right through this recap here, and we're going to start our reading off in chapter 3 once we go through this. So real quick, in chapter 1, I just wanted to read a little excerpt real quick that I thought that was mostly covering the entire chapter 1. I'll explain a little bit and I'll continue on. But in chapter 1, Mr. Freer mentions, since it is a concrete situation that the oppressor-oppressed contradiction is established, the resolution of this contradiction must be objectively verifiable. Hence, the radical requirement, both for the individual who discovers himself or herself to be an oppressor and for the oppressed, that the concrete situation which begets oppression must be transformed. If you notice, or if you was reading along with us in chapter 1, that transformation, Mr. Freer also talked about that becoming the new man. And this new man becomes human, and he recognizes himself as human, leaving, especially the oppressor, leaving the ideology of dehumanization and going into, he calls it an ontological vocation, going into this new way of perceiving the world as fully human, and humanizing others in the process. So when we was reading chapter 1, and I'm sure you all took notes from chapter 1, we see that the conversation was guiding us to how does man become human again? Or how does the oppressed become human again? And he told us about self-reflection. We've mentioned that word quite a few times in the last first and second chapter, especially on a lot of parts that I was discussing and expounding and reading on. The self-reflection and our involvement and our participation in the world that we see today, or the society that we have today, as we self-reflect and as we go through what's it called? The word escapes me right now. But nonetheless, as we go through these things and we understand, well, how did we get to point A? You know, how do we get to point B? We only come to those conclusions as we go back and reflect, and as we go back and consider our actions, which has caused the current social order in which we have. So when we read this, he says it's a concrete situation, the oppressor and the oppressed, and it calls for a radical requirement. And that radical requirement happens within the mind. And I think I was speaking about that before. It's almost a revolution in the mind. And we know that a revolution is a sudden change, a permanent change, and I forget the other one, but it's three stages of a revolution, but it's radical always, you know what I mean? And it's something that takes place in your mind. So as you start to think and reflect, you start to have these changes, these nuances in your mind, which ultimately causes praxis. And Mr. Freire mentions that as well in chapter 1, this praxis, or he calls it, it's action as well. He doesn't call it action, but he calls it authentic thought. So authentic thought is action, he said. He said, because without action, a thought is meaningless. So to make a thought authentic, it must implement action. So you just can't think about something and you're just thinking about it, because we know how that goes. That could lead to procrastination and a lot of other stuff, right? And we're just thinking about stuff, but not doing anything. We're just thinking about it, but you don't take action. His mic is unmuted. Oh, that's brother DJ. Hey, brother DJ, your mic is on.
Hey, sorry, it's not pulling up right now. I'm trying to mute, but it won't let me. If someone can mute me, that'd be cool. But
let me see if I can mute you. No problem, brother. Okay, I got you. Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. Excuses about that, family. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so it's and I did it again. And I muted again for some reason. I don't know why. Yeah, but nevertheless, though, whatchamacallit, so we see that Mr. Freire was telling us about this this praxis or this action. And this action is only authentic along with thought, because the thought needs the action, or the self-reflection needs the action for it to be really a thought, for it to really take root and do something, for it to change the actual material world in which we all live in. So when we was reading chapter 1, we see that this new man emerging, or this oppressed person, or this oppressor becoming a new man, happens through self-reflection and then the action, the praxis. And all of this is the historical process Mr. Freire mentioned. What is the historical process? Well, the historical process is none other than the revolution, becoming fully human again, leaving exploitation, leaving all these different chains and yokes which have us governed to material possession and commodities, and becoming fully human, seeing the world for what it is, right? The world is a place where mankind, let me say, we inhabit it and we enjoy the creations of the Almighty, the Most High. We enjoy the creation, we share the creation, and life is simple. Life is but a dream, as they would say. So we started to read in chapter 1 how this is something that the oppressed only can cultivate. The oppressor, really, his mind can't be moved to that level of thinking to create a radical requirement, or to create a sudden and a permanent change, a revolution. His mind is not necessarily able to go that direction, simply because it's something that happens in the mind when you are an oppressor. In other words, when you're an oppressor, you don't necessarily see all the destruction and all the hell and chaos that you cause, right? Because you're the beneficiary of it. So to you, life is good. Everyone else's sorrows and everyone else's pain it really doesn't matter. It really isn't. I don't want to say it doesn't matter neither. To some folks, it doesn't matter, but to some oppressors, well, let me say to some oppressors, it doesn't matter. But to some oppressors, they never even consider it because they're not being exploited, right? And their minds just never go that route because they don't see it. So Mr. Freire argued, and he talked about how the oppressed must make the oppressor see the unjust conditions and the unfair conditions. And this happens only when the oppressed understand their involvement in their oppression. And that involvement is basically a lot of things. He mentioned docility. He mentioned us being docile. He mentioned the ideology, or he mentioned the position of us being fatalist. You know what I mean? We feel as though that this unjust order or this corrupt society is ordained by God, some would say. So he mentions all these. He also mentions us internalizing the ways of the oppressor. So Mr. Freire shows us in chapter 1 all these different things that will hinder this historical process. Then he shows us how to get to the historical process. So you have a back and forth. The historical process is made from the oppressed understanding their role and understanding who they are, becoming fully human by going through this self-reflection. This self-reflection leads them to praxis. It leads them to action. That action leads them to revolution, this radical change. On the way to this historical process or this revolution, the oppressed are faced with many things, like the internalization of the oppressor. They're faced with docility. They're faced with fatalist. They're faced with fatalism, excuse me. They're faced with procrastination. They're faced with a lot of different hurdles. Nevertheless, if they want to be human, they have to overcome all these things because no one else is responsible for our humanity or our humanization, should I say, using the language of the text. No one else is responsible for our humanization except the oppressed themselves. So that's a little briefing on chapter 1, just paraphrasing. Excuse me. In chapter 2, we read about the banking concept of education versus problem posing education. And in chapter 2, a lot was said, and a lot was revealing because if you guys were on with us, even during my portion of the reading, I had this understanding that, the students was now going to tell the teachers how to teach and how to educate the classroom. And, our elder at the school here, he shed some light on the conversation where we started to understand that that's not the argument that Mr. Freire was bringing out in chapter 2. He was actually bringing out what is exactly what it sounds like, problem posing education, to where as though we see certain issues in our society, and other than the teacher or the educator just giving us the reality or the problem and the answer for it, no, the students are encouraged to use their cognitive thinking skills and formulate answers in how to correct the contradictions or to correct the problems within their reality. So we saw this back and forth in chapter 2 of problem posing education versus banking concept of education. We learned that in the banking concept of education, the problems aren't really posed. It's just a bunch of answers to combat the problems that we aren't aware of. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. We're just told that we have to earn a living, right? We're never posed the problem, well, why do we have to earn a living? Why can't the resources be free and available to all that need them? And, so everybody can live comfortably. Those things aren't presented to us in problem posing education. No, we're just told that we have to earn a living. So, pick a career that you want, what you want to do with your future. In other words, we in being concept education, we don't see our society or our world as a stage that can be transformed. It almost looks like it's permanent. It seems as if all the issues that we face in everyday life, those are concrete things that cannot be changed. And Mr. Freire even mentions it about how the human being is constantly going through these processes. I'm paraphrasing, and he's able to transform or transcend his reality. But with the banking concept of education, we aren't given that encouragement. We're actually told that these are the way things are, and why? Because the teacher said so, the educator said so. And the educator, on another hand, isn't necessarily deliberately giving us this format of teaching, but we also talked about this in our conversations, how even some educators, they've been taught through the banking concept of education. So the way that they present the curriculum to the students is how they were presented the curriculum when they were in school. So we see that, and then we also talked about how this whole banking concept of education and problem posing education doesn't have to just necessarily be exclusive to the classroom. It can go outside the classroom or outside school corridors. So we can apply this to any facets of life. And that's when we started to go more into problem posing education. And we learned a lot of different things, such as, well, I'm gonna get some of this. One second. I want to be quick because I want to start the reading exactly at 9 o'clock to hand it over to the comrade so she can begin reading. But we saw with the problem posing education. Wow, I don't want to lose it. 1 second. Real quick. 1 second, bear with me. Oh, we saw that Mr. Freer, he had mentioned how the teacher, I'm reading the excerpt, and when it comes to banking concept education, and this is what problem posing education, basically problem posing education is the antithesis of banking concept education. So he mentions with banking concept education, the teacher cannot think for her students, nor can she impose her thought on them. Authentic thinking that is concerned about reality, does not take place in the ivory tower isolation, but only in communication. If it is true that thought has meaning only when generated by action upon the world, the subordination of students to teachers becomes impossible. Because because banking education begins with a false understanding of men and women as objects. It cannot promote the development of what Fromm calls biophily. And we understood that biophily is like is another antithesis of necromancy or necrophilia. Basically, biophily is pro-life. Necrophilia is dealing with dead, inanimated objects or things, right? So basically, what was being said is that when we look at problem posing education, in other words, the students become animated, they become alive. They are able to think for themselves. Whereas though, and because they can think for themselves, they can now transform their reality. In the banking concept of education, you're not encouraged to think for yourself. You're basically given, regurgitated information, and that's it. You don't even notice that there's a problem. You don't notice that people being hungry under a bridge is a problem. You just think because that person didn't try hard enough, that person didn't, whatever. We have all these different notions and false truths that we feel as though why we see homeless people and why we see people in poverty and destitute. But when we look at problem posing education, it presents, well, why is the person under the bridge? Why are there impoverished neighborhoods? This is what it does. And it causes the students, and it also makes the teacher be humble and become a student as well, along with the other students in the classroom. And it calls everyone to think, everyone to go through the self-reflection and then create this action towards the issues within our reality. So I don't want to go too far because I'm at 8:59. So and trust me, next week and even tonight we'll talk some more about all this, and we'll keep tying it up, because as we read, and even if you read other revolutionaries, you see how all the language and all the ideal, well, not the ideal, but the sentiment, everything lines up with each other. If you read a lot of things that Mr. Lennon said, even the last book that we was reading from Miss Macmillan, everything is lining up if you pay close attention to it, right? And now we was reading about capitalism must die, and now if you notice, Pedagogy of the Oppressed is teaching us how to kill it, right? And how do we kill it is by us becoming fully human again, right? And by us thinking for ourselves, about us thinking about the problems that we cause, the problems that we're in relation to because of our inaction. So now we have to take action, and that action makes us human again, but also that action is authentic thought. That's what Mr. Freer is saying. So without further ado, we're going to jump into chapter 3 this evening. And we have a guest reader for tonight. Well, not a guest reader, but we have a comrade, another comrade who will be a reader for this evening, and that's Comrade Sister Sue. And again, whoever has a different version of the book, it really doesn't matter for this evening because we're all starting off of chapter 3. If you follow along, we should be able to get the pages back in order. And if not, then next week we'll figure things out. But without further ado, I would like to turn over the floor to my fellow comrade and my sister, Mrs. Sue. And she'll take it away for us this evening. And I'll mute my mic. Shalom, sister. How are you?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for that wonderful recap. And I am well. Thanking God that I'm well. And I would like to say shalom and good evening to our listeners. Starting off with chapter 3. As we attempt to analyze dialogue as a human phenomenon, we discover something which is the essence of dialogue itself, the word. But the word is more than just an instrument which makes dialogue possible. Accordingly, we must seek its constitutive elements. Within the word, we find two dimensions, reflection and action. In such radical interaction, that if one is sacrificed, even in part, the other immediately suffers. There is no true word that is not at the same time a praxis. Thus, to speak a true word is to transform the world. Now, in reading that paragraph, what came to mind was, what is this word? What does this word mean to us? And to us, the word, as John 1, verse 1 tells us, that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So, is Mr. Fury saying that this word, this true word, that when we speak it, it will transform the world? Is he referring to God? I would like to think that he is. He may be of different beliefs than we have, but I think in his thoughts and how he sees the world, he recognizes that there is a power, a being that is the power that drives us to seek him, that encourages us to work. And when he talks about the constitutive elements of this word, that if we sacrifice one part, then the other immediately suffers, it brings to mind what praxis is, what action or reflection or work that we need to do. And as Psalms 28, verses 4 to 5 tells us, that our Creator will give them according to their deeds and according to the wickedness of their endeavors. Give them after the work of their hands, render them their deserts. Says to us that the work that you do will be rewarded. So if you want to be rewarded well, then you will do good. If you don't do good, then you will be rewarded. You'll get your just rewards for the evil that you've done. So what is this work that is being referred to? And John 8, verses 39, talks about this work. It says, they answered and said unto him, Abram is our father. But Jesus said unto them, if you were Abram's children, you would do the works of Abraham. So it begs the question, what is this work that we are being called to do? And this work is for us to be our brother's keeper. And what does it mean to be our brother's keeper? It means helping, caring, giving, feeding, comforting, and restoring each other in the word. So Mr. Freer continues, paragraph 2 says, an unauthentic word, one which is unable to transform reality, results when dichotomy is imposed upon its constitutive elements. When a word is deprived of its dimension of action, reflection automatically suffers as well. And the word is changed into idle chatter or into verbalism, into an alienated and alienating blah. It becomes an empty word, one which cannot denounce the world, for denunciation is impossible without a commitment to transform. And there is no transformation without action. But then that brings to mind 1 Corinthians 13, verse 1. Which reads, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, I am become as a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. So all words without action is useless. It's not transformative. And so the author, Mr. Freire, calls us to act and not just speak. And that is in parallel to what our master teacher also calls us to do. Continuing, on the other hand, if action is emphasized exclusively to the detriment of reflection, the word is converted into activism. The latter, action for action's sake, negates the true praxis and makes dialogue impossible. Neither dichotomy, by creating unauthentic forms of existence, creates also unauthentic forms of thought, which reinforce the original dichotomy. Human existence cannot be silent, nor can it be nourished by false words. For only by true words, with which men and women transform the world. To exist humanly is to name the world, to change it. Once named, the world is in its turn reappears to the namers as a problem and requires of them a new naming. Human beings are not built in silence, but in word, in work, in action, reflection. Genesis tells us that our Creator spoke and created the universe and all that in there is. So, word to us is very important. It nourishes our spirit. It provides guidance on how we should live and how we should name the world, the society that we are to create for all mankind, not just for persons who feel that it is their divine right to rule or to be rich or to oppress, but to all of creation. And when we say all of creation, we mean all creation that will do the work of the Creator. But while to say the true word, which is work, which is praxis, is to transform the world, saying that word is not privilege of some few persons, but the right of everyone. Consequently, no one can say a true word alone, nor can she say it for another, in a prescriptive act which robs others of their words. Dialogue is the encounter between men mediated by the word in order to name the world. Hence, dialogue cannot occur between those who want to name the world and those who do not wish this naming, between those who deny others the right to speak their word and those whose right to speak has been denied them. Those who have been denied their primordial right to speak their word must first reclaim this right and prevent the continuation of this dehumanizing aggression, or as what we would know as violence. If it is in speaking their word that people, by naming the world, transform it, dialogue imposes itself as the way by which we achieve significance as human beings. Dialogue is thus an existential necessity, and since dialogue is the encounter the united reflection and action of dialoguers are addressed to the world, which is to be transformed and humanized, this dialogue cannot be reduced to the act of one person's depositing ideas in another, nor can it become a simple exchange of ideas to be consumed by the discussants. What this says to me, comrades, is that we are all called to act. It's not sufficient to sit in church or in assemblies and listen to the word and then go home and feel good and go to sleep. We are called to action. As Job says, where he sought out injustice, he sought out the hungry, he sought out people who needed help, and it was his duty, his action to alleviate their suffering. And so we can use these elders in the Bible as our examples of how we are to live, the action that is required, the transformation that we are called upon to make in the world. It is not sufficient for us to say that the system is overwhelming or is too big or we can't do anything about it. We can and we must. And this is the action that we are called upon to do. Is there anyone who would like to make a comment on what we've read so far?
No, I don't have one, but I think it was really good what you have brought out thus far. Yeah, I really think it's some really good points that we definitely have to keep in mind.
Thank you, Elder. So continuing, nor yet is it a hostile, polemical argument between those who are committed neither to the naming of the world nor the search for truth, but rather for the imposition of their own truth. Because dialogue is an encounter among women and men who name the world. It must not be a situation where some name on behalf of others. It is an act of creation. It must not serve as a crafty instrument for the domination of one person by another. The domination implicit in dialogue is that of the world by the dialoguers. It is conquest of the world for the liberation of humankind. Dialogue cannot exist, however, in the absence of profound love for the world and for people. And this sentence here just underscores the commandment, which our master teacher tells us, commands us to love our brothers as we love ourselves. And in this of love, if we live in love, and if we embody what it means to love, then we cannot oppress or do harm to each other. If we are living in true love, then the thought of oppressing another would not come to us. If our minds are renewed and we focus, as Paul teaches, if we focus on what is calling us to do, then our mind should be consumed with these thoughts, and therefore there would be no room to think of evil or to do evil. And so it's something for us to really consider. What does it mean to love? To truly love someone as you love yourself. And these, once we consider this, and once we, as Brother Judah would say, Imuna, it's not just a love in thought, but it's an active love. And that's what we're called upon to embody. And that is what Mr. Freer calls a profound love for the world and for people. John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son." How many of us would sacrifice the life that we are living for others? Are we ready to sacrifice, to lay down our lives for others? Do we have this profound love for people who are not immediate members of our family? Do we continue to pray for people who are hungry, or do we feed them? Do we clothe them? And this is the love that we are called upon to show each other. And love is not always lovey and feely and warm and fuzzy. Sometimes we have to show love by reproving each other. If your brother is going down the path where that would lead him to destruction, in love, we have to bring him back from the brink of destruction. It is not sufficient to say, oh, he's an adult, he should know. We have to do what love calls us to do and help the brother who is in the ditch. And so this is what profound love teaches us. Not profound love of self, that we are so selfish that it doesn't cross our mind that somebody may be suffering, but that we think of others first and show love. Continuing, the naming of the world, which is an act of creation and recreation, is not possible if it is not infused with love. Love is at the same time the foundation of dialogue and dialogue itself. It is thus necessarily the task of responsible subjects and cannot exist in a relation of domination. Domination reveals the pathology of love. Sadism is a dominator, and masochism is the dominated. Because love is an act of courage, not of fear, love is commitment to others. No matter where the oppressed are found, the act of love is commitment to their cause, the cause of liberation. And this commitment, because it is loving, is dialogical. The footnote says, I am more and more convinced that true revolutionaries must perceive the revolution because of its creative and liberating nature as an act of love. For me, the revolution, which is not possible without a theory of revolution, therefore science, is irreconcilable, is not irreconcilable with love. On the contrary, the revolution is made by people to achieve their humanization. What indeed is a deeper motive which moves individuals to become revolutionaries, but the dehumanization of people? The distortion imposed by the word love by the capitalist world cannot prevent the revolution from being essentially loving in character, nor can it prevent the revolutionaries from affirming their love of life. Guevara, while admitting the risk of seeming ridiculous, was not afraid to affirm it. Let me say, with the risk of appearing ridiculous, that the true revolutionary is guided by strong feelings of love. It is impossible to think of an authentic revolution without this quality. Venceremos, the speeches and writings of Che Guevara, edited by John Garassi. As an act of bravery, love cannot be sentimental. As an act of freedom, it must not serve as a pretext for manipulation. And this right here reminds me of what Stephanie Macmillan spoke about in her book, Capitalism Must Die, when she spoke about the foundations that are created by the capitalist giants to as a form of charity, these charitable acts that they carry out, this false generosity that they have. So they are showing love, but it is a pretext for manipulation. And so it's interesting to me that different authors during different times have similar ideas about the social structures that are built in our society to keep the oppressed in an oppressed state. And as Mr. Fear speaks about the humanizing state, while the oppressor is continually hoarding resources for themselves, and in doing so, feel justified and feel that they are right to do so. And as Mr. Fieri says, only a revolution born out of love can change this system. And this revolution born out of love cannot be done without the Creator being a part and center of it. Otherwise, it is bound to fail, as past revolutionaries have found. They had the right idea, but the wrong methodology. And so I would encourage us that in our revolution, we have to focus on the right methodology, the only methodology that will help us in this fight to bring justice to all mankind. So continuing, as an act of bravery, love cannot be sentimental. As an act of freedom, it must not serve as a pretext of manipulation. It must generate other acts of freedom. Otherwise, it is not love. Only by abolishing the situation of oppression is it possible to restore the love which that situation made impossible. If I do not love the world, if I do not love life, if I do not love people, I cannot enter into dialogue. That's very thought-provoking to me, because then what is this dialogue that we're talking about? And Mr. Fieri tells us it's not just empty words. It's not just tinkling symbol. It is an act. It is a reflection. It is love. That word that we were given in the scriptures to show us how to live. That word which created us. That word which is breathing life into our bodies. That wakes us up every morning. That keeps us living from second to second. That word is calling us to action. What then is our response? Do we read the word and feel good? Do we hear the word and feel good? Or do we respond with action, with praxis? We have been reading different books. We have been educating ourselves so that we can be equipped and ready for action. And so this encourages me, and I hope it encourages everyone that we're on the right path. We just need to keep going. I hope I can speak for everyone when I say we are on the right path. Continuing the reading, it says, on the other hand, dialogue cannot exist without humility. The naming of the world through which people constantly recreate that world cannot be an act of arrogance. Dialogue as the encounter of those addressed to the common task of learning and acting is broken if the parties or one of them lack humility. How can I dialogue if I always project ignorance onto others and never perceive my own? And this goes back, brothers and sisters, to the scripture that says, that calls us to pick the beam out of our eyes so that we can see clearly, to help our brothers and sisters with the most that is in theirs. Is there anything else more eloquently said about how we should live and treat each other? Not to be judgment when we ourselves, by the act of judging, we're doing the same, or we may be doing the same acts as the person we are reproving or correcting. And so in love, we treat each other the way that we want to be treated. And so we would hope that if we're going down the wrong paths, our brother would say to us, you're going down the wrong path. In love. Dialogue as the encounter of those addressed to the common task of learning and acting is broken if the parties or one of them lack humility. A soft answer turneth away wrath. How can I dialogue if I always project ignorance onto others and never perceive my own? How can I dialogue if I regard myself as a case apart from others? Mere its in whom I cannot recognize other eyes. And so this is as a result of the dehumanizing of each other, that we do not recognize the humanity in our fellow human beings. And I dare to say, do not recognize the humanity in ourselves. And so this is why we perpetuate the process of dehumanizing each other. And so the acts of reflecting should enable us to recognize how dehumanized we are and how we are dehumanizing each other, and name the world and change the world, transform the world. And you would say, how can you transform without knowledge? So the act of education, of the right education, will help us to know how to transform by first being transformed and then transforming our world. Continuing, how can I dialogue if I consider myself a member of the in group of pure men, the owners of truth and knowledge, for whom all non-members are these people or the great unwashed. Or as we read in the scriptures, savage men. How can I dialogue if I start from the premise that naming the world is the task of an elite and that the presence of the people in history is a sign of deterioration, thus to be avoided? How can I dialogue if I'm close to and even offended by the contribution of others? How can I dialogue if I'm afraid of being displaced, the mere possibility causing me torment and weakness? And I must confess, I highlighted this section in the book because it reminded me of what the Pharisees and Sadducees said as their justification for killing Christ. They had the fear that the Romans would come and take away their privileges and their place and all the things that went with it, the riches and the prestige. And so, in their fear of losing their place, of being displaced from their high status in the society, they decided to sacrifice, to murder the Christ. And of course, in our everyday life, we see that if you are perceived to be a threat, then you'll be eliminated. And I think sometimes that is the fear that keeps us from action because we don't want to die. We don't want to be martyred. We want to be comfortable, but we cannot transform if we're comfortable. We can only transform by becoming uncomfortable with the status quo, becoming uncomfortable with oppression and injustice. And until we are uncomfortable with how things are, we will never transform. As a matter of fact, we will conform to the status quo. But our master teacher calls us to not to conform, to be complacent and comfortable with the status quo, but to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. And this renewing of the mind is a daily renewing of the mind. Because it is easy to get caught up in the comforts and the delicacies of this world. Everything that is there for the pleasure of man. Material things, prestige, money, it's all there. Anything that you can dream of, if your heart desires it, you can get it. And so if we're caught up in the capitalism or the capitalist society, we will not love our brothers and sisters because we don't want to be displaced. Nobody wants to be poor. Nobody wants to suffer. Nobody wants to eat dirt. But how can we say that we love if we are comfortable with suffering that exists in our society, immediate society, and in other countries overseas. We cannot be comfortable if we say we are followers of Christ, because he calls us to act. Continuing the reading, it says, self-sufficiency is incompatible with dialogue. Men and women who lack humility or have lost it cannot come to the people, cannot be their partners in naming the world. Someone who cannot acknowledge himself to be as mortal as everyone else still has a long way to go before he can reach the point of encounter. At the point of encounter, there are neither utter ignoramuses or perfect sages. There are only people who are attempting together to learn more than they now know. Dialogue further requires an intense faith in mankind, faith in their power to make and remake, to create and recreate, faith in their vocation to be more fully human, which is not the privilege of an elite, but the birthright of all. Faith in people is an a priori requirement for dialogue. The dialogical man believes in others, even before he meets them face to face. His faith, however, is not naive. The dialogical man is critical and knows that although it is within the power of humans to create and transform, in a concrete situation of alienation, individuals may be impaired in the use of that power. And so a couple of weeks ago, we spoke about the ability for critical thinking, and recognize that not all of us know how to think critically, and therefore some people live oblivious to what's going on in the world around us. We who are thinking in a critical way and know the power of critical thinking need to guide, teach, enlighten our brothers and sisters in how to critically look at all the constructs in the society, the subliminal messages, the different ways in which people are being oppressed, whether it is on a subliminal level or outright physical oppression. To acknowledge that we need to together dialogue towards a solution, the solution, that we need to wake up or become further enlightened so that we can help in the struggle. And it will get worse before it gets better. We thought that COVID was something that we've never seen before. But as we can see in the news every day, there are new and new diseases that are coming up. So COVID came in and we were in turmoil for 2 years, 2.5 years. And now that we're getting back to normal, quote unquote normal, we have these other diseases that are coming out. there's monkeypox and, all these other things to keep us in this state of turmoil so that we don't observe what's going on around us, that we don't unite and transform the world. And yes, capitalism is dying, slowly but surely, and we hope to hasten its demise. And so what we are observing is the system of capitalism trying to reinvent itself to keep us dependent on pharmaceuticals, to keep us dependent on governments to help us to be our parents, to keep us in mental bondage as juveniles, children who aren't able to critically think about what's going on around us. And so, do have a lot of work ahead of us, I believe, but I also think that we can do it. So with that comment, brothers and sisters, I'd like to end the reading for tonight and pick up again next week. I don't want to rush this chapter. And so I'd like to invite any comments. Does anybody have anything you want to add or?
Yes, ma'am, Sister Sue. I didn't want to interrupt you while you were expounding.
Oh no, yes, you could. No worries there. You could.
I was I was enjoying it so much. If I could, I would give you a standing ovation, honestly, when you were expounding on the fact, because we hear that scripture all the time. Do not be conformed to this world. But when you mentioned the fact that the only way that's possible, that scripture really, becomes real, is when we're uncomfortable with our current social order. You mentioned the fact that when we become comfortable, then we'll be conformed to it. So we have to become uncomfortable with the exploitation, the suffering of others, people around the world going through all kind of hellacious conditions. If we don't see ourselves a part of the salvation or the arm of the Lord, then we are we are complacent and comfortable. And then when it says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, I mean, the way that you brought it to my awareness, or the way you brought it out this evening, I should say, I never thought about that. Us not participating or whatever we do when we find time to do everything else, but to study, to read, to engage with others, to present information, we are being comfortable and we are conforming to this world. When we get discouraged and we don't want to do, I was just talking to Elder about this today, having encounters with people, and the rejection was on the table, but it didn't discourage me. But when we become discouraged now, we don't even want to go back outside no more. We don't even want to talk about it. We don't even want to study. By default, we become conformed to this world. And I mean, but I know we hear that scripture many times, but the way that you explained it, I mean, it was off the chain. I liked in the beginning of chapter 3 when Mr. Freer had mentioned, I just wanted to grab it real quick. He said, and this was just heavy to me. He said, thus to speak a true word is to transform the world. And I thought about when Christ said, if you speak to the mountain, you know what I mean? We know that the mountains symbolically means the governments. And to speak a true word, it means to transform the reality. So, and he goes on to say that any word that we speak that doesn't have a change in effect on reality, it's just verbosity. It's just a whole lot of talking, and it ain't worth nothing. So, we see the master teacher telling us to speak to the mountains, speak to the rulers, right? And then once when you speak to it and you command it to be cast in the sea, something takes place when you speak this true word to it, and action takes place. Not just talking and talking. No, when you speak true words, a true word, action is behind it, or action is espoused to it. And there you have again this transformation, not conforming, not being comfortable. This transformation happens when you speak these true words. But if you're not saying anything, if you're not doing anything, if there's no action, you by default become to conform to the world. And I mean, you had so many other points that you brought out, and I don't want to be long. I know other comrades may want to say something, but it was awesome, sis. I mean, just what you covered so far, all the scriptures that you brought out, and that corresponded with Mr. Freer was saying. Even when you talked about the mote being in one's eye, he was asking a question about how can I dialogue if I mean, everything was just it was awesome, sis. I really take my hat off to you, but I yield. I couldn't say enough, but I yield, comrade.
Thank you, Brother Brand. Yes, I mean, the chapter is thought-provoking, and there are so many scriptures that come to mind when reading it. It's like everything he's talking about, there is a scripture for that. There are just so many good ones to choose from that I mean, I know it's a secular book and everything, but God has a way of pointing us to the information of showing us new ways to look at things. And it's just mind-boggling sometimes. You read the Bible and you're reading it, it doesn't mean anything. But then you read something else and all of a sudden the scripture just pops into your head that this is an example of what it means. It's not a 2,000 year ago example. It's a living example. It's happening right now. That we can draw on that example and immediately understand what the Bible meant, because we have a living example in what's happening now. And I think that's just awesome to me, to just be able to read the Bible and then just to see things happening and to just instantly know that this is what it meant.
Yeah, I would like to say something too. Again, as usual, I enjoy the reading and the dialogue and hearing brothers and sisters bring excellent points to the table, to the group. I just want to add concerning the love. He was like Sister Sue said, there's so many scriptures there. And he said that love is an act of courage. And it reminds me of the text where it says, perfect love casts out fear. And Mr. Freer also says love cannot be sentimental. As an act of freedom, it must not serve as a pretext for manipulation. It must generate other acts of freedom. Otherwise, it is not love. And this was something I would hear as far as love, 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 growing up, love, love. It was always a sentimental thing. And after a while, just get aggravated. Love this, love that. We need to love each other. Do you love each other? But there's no action. When we look at the Messiah explaining perfect love, no greater love than this. A man layeth down his life for his friends. When you look at what needs to be as far as acts of liberation and how it does take courage to lay down your life for your friends and for those who, like the Messiah, looked upon the children in his day. He looked upon the people and he said he had compassion upon them. They were like sheep having no shepherd. And we look at the devastating condition that the people are in today. And the most, it seems that I have run into those who claim to believe, the most that they have done was to pretty much prepare the people or try to convince the people to just accept these humiliating and this deplorable condition for whatever reason, whether to change in the future, whether they go to heaven, whatever it is. But to act, to change the situation is what really began to answer my questions about sincere, true love. People are talking about they love. We should love each other. If we love each other and if we love our fellow man, it's not about talking soft and being nice. That's a part of it. But what it's about is to see liberation for others, to want it for others. So even when it comes out to dialogue and going out to people, you're going to tell the ones you love about good news. And so if we really love, it goes beyond our own fear of rejection. It goes beyond our own fear. People gonna look at us crazy. It goes outside of our regular comforts because we get up and go to work. Those of us who have a job, we almost do any other thing, our own recreational things, our job, or just, whether it's the movie, sit in the movie theater for 2 hours or so. But to just take time out to go talk to your neighbor, if we feel that we have found something worth living for, to go tell our neighbor, that's a struggle. And we need to examine it. Because love is an act of courage. And you have to go out because that's what we called to do. Yes, you're going to be hated, like he said. But they hate the servants of God because of the love in which they show. And this is something that taking the next steps, as Sister Sue was bringing out tonight, the next steps, we learning in the classroom. And we, God willing, we have much more time and days and months and years to learn in the classroom. And the classroom learning must alternate with in the field work. That is the apprenticeship. And now we can test what we have learned, because it said, however well you can explain it to someone else, that's how you can gauge on how much you do understand, number one. And number two, it will also gauge on truly testing our love indeed. Going out to our brothers and sisters or our neighbors and talking to them and trying to get them to come into the fold of the kingdom of God. And this is, we have to search the recesses of our hearts and find out, well, why we not doing this if we're not doing it, especially if we're talking about let's love each other. So with that, I'll yield and let you get back to it. But you bringing out, I think both of you heard Bryant or Jan talking and bringing out some excellent points. So I'll yield with that. But I just wanted to talk about that courage and going out to feed Yah sheep. I don't know if anyone trying to say anything, but check your mics. Or if you heard, I think I said I yield, but I don't know if everyone heard me.
Yes, Brother Judah. I really like what you said there, and I think now willingly will move from strength to strength as we continue the education process and learning how to dialogue and how to reach um, reach out to people, what to say to them, to convince them that there is another way than what they're living. I know people don't want to be uncomfortable. Nobody wants to be poor. Everybody wants to be comfortable and have a nice house, a nice car, and money and all the things. So what would convince them that the system that we're in is not what the creator intended? How can we convince them to become uncomfortable so that we can all be in a place where we have what we need to live? Most people don't give a second thought. They eat, and when they're filled, they throw away the rest. They don't think about somebody who hasn't eaten in days. They take one bite out of something and they don't want it anymore. They toss it. They don't think about the person who's going through the garbage trying to find something to eat. It just doesn't cross their minds. There's no thought about somebody else who might be in a position that they need help. They have excess clothing. They don't donate it. They boast about how many pairs of sneakers or Jordans or whatever it is they have, and somebody's walking around barefooted. The thought it doesn't come. It doesn't bother them. And yes, they might see somebody on the street, maybe somebody who's deranged or homeless, and the thought comes, oh my, so sad. And then the next thought is something else. They completely forget that they saw somebody in need. And that is a transformation that we need to get people to start thinking, how do I, as Job said, seek out these people who need something? How can I go and find them where they are and help? but I have hope that we'll get there. And with that, I yield. Does anyone else have any comments to make or anything you want to add?
Shalom, sis.
Shalom.
No, I just wanted to say that I like the way that you were reading, and I was just reading along with you and listening to how you were doing it, and you was really it was really sparking some thought as far as to what he was laying down in this book and his writing here, and you were capturing it and just making me think, and I wouldn't have probably caught it if I was just reading it by myself like this. That's why through this whole book course, when we're reading it together amongst each other, you can kind of grab it better when we're in a setting like this, reading it together, because a lot of this stuff I probably wouldn't have read over or underlined or looked over. And so I just like how you did it tonight. And I don't know I don't know if it's gonna be the same way, because I'm reading next. So I don't know if I'm gonna be the same way, if I'm gonna be able to captivate an audience like you did, but I just want to say shalom, and I like how you was reading it.
Thanks, comrade. To settle my mind so that, all the things that came to my mind, I could just bring it out in the discussion, because I really, and this is important, that work that we're doing. And I think as the more we dialogue, the more we go through these activities and get to know each other and get more comfortable, is better we will be when we're ready to, to go forth and do the acts, speak the word. So you encourage me, and Brother Brand and Brother Jordan and other comments encourage me, and so I'm just thanking God that I could encourage you as well.
And like you just said, this is very important work. That's why I think that the Bible always talks about a remnant, because not everyone is going to see what we're seeing. And like, to us, it's like right dead, smack dead in the face. We can see it because all we do is we look outside, we look around our surroundings, we look at what's going on. And this Bible has to have a more tangible answer than what we've been accustomed to, how been being taught to us. And it's not only us who see it, but look at the writers of these books, Paulo Freire, and all the other books that Stephanie McMillan, they see it as well. And not all of them are, I guess you could say, in tune to the scriptures as we are, but they see it, and they're able to write about it, and then that gives us strength and to be able to take their writings off what they see and apply it totally to what the scriptures are saying. And so that's why I say I think it's, I'm resigning to the fact that, yeah, maybe only a remnant is gonna see this and be the ones to fight, and show the other ones, I guess, how to fight, what to fight for. So strength ain't in numbers. What did he say? Not by power, might nor by strength, but by his spirit.
And again, it came back to me as Ak was speaking when Elder had made mention of the scripture, perfect love casteth out fear. In the absence of fear, it has to be courage. You know what I mean? And when Mr. Freer talks about dialogue is only true and pure when love is not absent, I just think that that's just the thought of that. So, if we say that we have love and we have Christ's love and we have this gospel, as Elder mentioned earlier, as far as us being disciples, if we love, we got to tell other people. Because, I was sharing with Elder how, my siblings, they come to you with this what happens when people do that. And Elder was sharing some things with me too, but that's what we hear commonly. Oh, we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't, we shouldn't try to get no political party. You know what I mean? They going to kill you. They going to do all this kind of stuff. And I was sharing with Elder, they do the same thing to people who doing illegal stuff. You know what I mean? But is it love? Is it love driving it? You know what I mean? No matter what they're gonna do to us, people be martyred, people be thrown in jail. We know at the end it was love driving it. And I believe that because that's so pure, like Sister Sue, you was asking earlier, are we ready to really die and lay down our lives for people who aren't our immediate family members? That's the kind of love that Christ is putting on display. Are we ready to do that? And I think because, as Elder mentioned to me earlier, because people don't get immediate gratification from this type of work. They ain't ready to go to jail for it. They ain't ready to get martyred and killed or whatever the case or whatever the repercussions that comes with it. They're not ready to do that because it's something that's been taught in this system or this social order, that everything is, we know what the individualism deal. Everything is about self. Everything is about, how it makes you feel. And that's not what the prophets or the master teachers bringing to us. It's telling us, no, the greatest is the one that serves each other. So it's not about, how this make me look at me. No, it's not that kind of deal. It's actually a social renovation. It's totally different. And when you think about the Hebrews and you think about all the writings, you see how they could have been a weird and strange people to other nations. Like these guys are like obsessed with equity. These guys are obsessed with just doing. These are guys that are obsessed with making sure everybody has a hot meal. That's something that you don't find in this society. So when he was mentioning Mr. Freer in his book about dialogue is only pure with this love. If I have love, I have to by default, I have to go and be a disciple and tell others. Because if we see Christ's love was to lay down his life for his friends, and Christ's love was to lay down his life for humanity, as well as with his friends, how do we mirror that same love? We read all the time, John 14 and 12, the works that I do, ye shall do also. How do we do these works? You know what I mean? And I just find it so interesting that Mr. Freer is saying that to us, that us communicating, you know what I mean? Us recognizing others' humanity. This is, I mean, I could go on for hours. I'm actually livid beyond the fact that our love doesn't not constitute, but our love doesn't have, I don't want to say it has anything to do with like a mushy feeling, but it has everything to do with action. It has everything to do with the social order. If we're going to talk about love, if we're going to talk about loving one another, it's not just, oh, I'm going to give you a hug, we shake hands, and the argument is over. No, I'm going to make sure that equity is established forever. And it's only one way that we can do that, by educating ourselves on to see how do we live. Like when he was mentioning about the word, God gave the word to Israel, or the legislation to Moses. And that word, that legislation transformed the whole family of Israel, because they were taught one way in Egypt. They were taught one, understanding, or one style of living in Egypt. But when he gave them this word, this true word, as Mr. Freer was saying, which transforms reality, look how it transformed the whole nation of Israel when they finally went into Canaan. The reality of feudalism wasn't there. It transformed everything. So, I mean, it's just, I don't want to be all over the place, but I mean, this is just some riveting stuff, man. I don't know what to say, but I yield, I'll mute my mic.